Hi everybody and welcome to Heel Heat. My name is George Coles and on this episode we're doing a top 10. Topic of this top 10, you may have guessed by the thumbnail, is just a little bit different. This is the top 10 wrestlers as picked by ChatGPT. Now normally I decide my top 10s, I think them out. Been hearing a lot in the news lately all over the place about ChatGPT and AI, and that you can ask it questions and it would give you answers. So my thought was, let's ask ChatGPT who the top 10 wrestlers of all time, and we'll make a top 10 list based off of what they said. Well, that being said, let's jump right into this. Number 10, Triple H. I can't really argue with them here. I think Triple H definitely deserves to be in the top 10 of all time. He's had a fantastic career. If you add in his behind-the-scenes contributions, it probably would put him a lot higher on this list. But just the in-front-of-the-camera stuff definitely deserves him a spot on here. I think he's absolutely amazing, and I think ChatGPT actually knocked it out of the park by including him on this list. I kind of didn't expect him to be on here. There's a couple others I didn't, and we'll get to them when we get there. But yeah, that was really awesome that he was included. I definitely think he deserves a spot. Now going from that, our number 9, the Macho Man, Randy Savage. I don't know what they used for the algorithm on this, but I don't believe that anybody anywhere would argue the fact that Macho Man Randy Savage doesn't deserve to be on a top 10 list. The only argument you may have is that he's placed a little bit low on this. An absolutely fantastic and groundbreaking wrestler, one of the wrestlers that made the rock and wrestling era of WWE the success that it was. Just a fantastic talent, one of the iconic wrestlers of all time. Amazing talent, definitely deserving to be on the list. Now going from the Macho Man, our number 8, Andre the Giant. This one did surprise me a little bit when I look at the list in total, and I'll explain that at the end so we don't spoil everything. But absolutely, Andre is a deserving member on the list. One of the biggest attractions in pro wrestling, and probably, it could be argued, prior to Hulk Hogan, the biggest star in pro wrestling. There have been some other stars that I would say are comparable. Andre's a guy that we're still talking about 30 years after him passing. He made that much of an impact on pro wrestling. There's still movies and shows being made about Andre the Giant just because of how important he was to the sport. With all that, I can't argue with his placement on this list. I think he definitely deserves to be there. Now going from that, our number 7, the Heartbreak Kid, Shawn Michaels. Shawn Michaels is regarded by many people as the best wrestler of his generation, and by some, the greatest in-ring talent of all time. I've even heard guys like Ric Flair say that. One of the real mainstays of the WWE in the 90s, and even after his comeback, which to me, after his comeback, I think he was better than he was during what most people consider his prime. A multiple-time world champion, a multiple-time Hall of Famer. Definitely a guy I would definitely consider being in the top 10 wrestlers of all time. And I could see where the algorithm would place him on this list. It definitely makes sense to me. Going from that, our number 6, probably Shawn Michaels' biggest rival, Bret the Hitman Hart. The excellence of execution. You can't have Bret without Shawn. You can't have Shawn without Bret. Both of these guys revolutionized how wrestling was treated in what would become the biggest company in the history of wrestling, where a guy didn't have to be 6'7" and 270 pounds and coming right off of the Arnold Classic. They could be a smaller guy that was just a great wrestler and make it all the way to the top and become an icon. There's a lot of people that will put Bret the Hitman Hart on the top of their list. People like even CM Punk or FTR talk about him as being the greatest wrestler of all time. When the bell rang, you can't say there was anybody that was any better. There may have been people that were on his level, but no one's ever been better than Bret the Hitman Hart when it came from bell to bell. He always gave a great match. He always was better than most people on the card. Just a fantastic talent and a fantastic wrestler. Definitely deserving to be in the top 10. We're going from Bret, our number 5, John Cena. This one was a little bit surprising to me. Not that John Cena would make the top 10, but that an algorithm would put him there. I would imagine that the algorithm got the information from other top 10 lists. And I'm not knocking Cena. Don't get me wrong on this. I can't imagine there's too many top 10 lists that put John Cena above guys like Randy Savage, Shawn Michaels, and Bret Hart. Now, does he have the accolades? Does he deserve to be above them? That could be argued. It really can. He has more championships than all those guys. He had a bigger run on the top than most of those guys. He was the undisputed face of the WWE when WWE was the only act in town for over a decade. I mean, there's a lot you could say positively about John Cena. I just kind of found it interesting that he made it this high onto the list. Like I said, I don't know what the algorithm looked for. I have to assume it compiled a bunch of other top 10 lists and, basically went with an average score kind of thing. I didn't expect Cena to be this high, but he definitely deserves to be on the list. That's why he's here at number 5. Going from that, our number 4, a former WrestleMania opponent of John Cena's, The Rock. Now, if we're strictly talking about impact and character in pro wrestling, The Rock has to be one of the top wrestlers of all time. If we're talking about longevity and in-ring talent, everybody else on this list beats him. And I'm sorry, I'm a Rock guy. I like The Rock. I like his movies even. I just don't think he quite has the resume where I would put him this high on my top 10. And I'm not knocking anybody that would. There's a lot of people still to this day that if you ask them to name a wrestler, they're not going to go but 2 or 3 wrestlers before they say The Rock. That's how big of an impact he's had culturally. If you ask them who their favorite is or who their favorite growing up was, they're going to say The Rock. He's made that big of an impact on wrestling, so he is justifiable of being here. Again, much like Cena, I was a little bit surprised he was this high on the list. Not surprised that he was on the list at all, though. Now, going from that, our number 3, probably The Rock's biggest rival, Stone Cold Steve Austin. It could be argued that Steve Austin is the biggest draw in wrestling history, the most popular talent in wrestling history, the guy that made the WWE Attitude Era, WWF Attitude Era what it was, the guy that did record business for the biggest company in wrestling. I cannot argue with Steve Austin being this high on this list. I mean, his accolades speak for themselves. The guy drew money. I believe at some point there was a report that said, I forget if it was Kmart or Walmart, but it was one of the big box stores at the time, that 1 out of every 4 t-shirts they sold was a Stone Cold t-shirt. Just think about how crazy that is. How many thousands and probably millions of shirts went through those doors, and how many of them belonged to Stone Cold. Think of all the people you knew at the time that were wearing them to school, to work. You would see them everywhere. You would go to a baseball game, there'd be 5 people in the audience with an Austin 316 shirt. You'd go to the movies, the guy that took your ticket might have it. The couple in the row in front of you might have a shirt on. This is how much he crossed over into the mainstream and how he impacted how people watched wrestling. Everybody loves Stone Cold, probably why he's number 3 on their list. I can't argue with that at all. Going from that, our number 2, the Hulkster, Hulk Hogan. Again, looking at the criteria, I don't know what they used because it's kind of all over the place. Some of these guys are better work rate guys, some of these guys are better promo guys, some of these guys are bigger crossover talents. Maybe it was an amalgamation of all of those things. Hulk Hogan, absolutely one of the most popular wrestlers of all time, one of the biggest stars that's ever came out of wrestling, a guy that defined an era in the 80s in WWF and then redefined an era in the 90s with the NWO. Just an amazing talent. There's a lot negative that's been said about Hulk Hogan, and he has done some things that I'm not a fan of. There have been some issues, but you can't argue with the fact that as far as impact in the world of pro wrestling, there's very few that could say they're on the level of Hulk Hogan. Now, normally, before I get into my top 1, I give you a best of the rest that I would have considered for the list. For this, I usually give 1 or 2 extra. I asked ChatGPT for the top 12. So this is number 11 and 12. We're going to call them the best of the rest for this list. First up, Eddie Guerrero. I'm not at all shocked that Eddie Guerrero would be in the top 12 wrestlers of all time. He's a guy that's looked at fondly. A lot of wrestlers say that he was their inspiration. There's a lot of fans that say that he was their favorite. He's a guy that just made an amazing impact in the wrestling world. We lost him very early. He probably could have went on with another decade of excellence. I love Eddie, so I can't argue with him being considered for this, hence why he was there. Now, last but not least, on our best of the rest, The Undertaker. I am 1,000,000% shocked shocked. Any metric you go by, whether it be in-ring, promo ability, character, longevity, crossover appeal, anything you could think of to make a wrestler great, The Undertaker had. Undertaker, arguably one of the greatest of all time, one of the biggest stars that's ever been in wrestling. There'll never be another Undertaker. I'm kind of shocked he didn't make the list proper, but I'm glad that we did get to mention. Now, normally this is where I'll say, if you think I put someone too high, too low, left someone off the list, let me know. What I will say instead, if you go to ChatGPT, and you get a different list, post your list in the comments that they give you in case they do something totally different. With all that being said, our number one professional wrestler, according to ChatGPT, the Nature Boy, Ric Flair. It is very hard to argue that Ric Flair is the greatest wrestler of all time. I've said it myself several times. I'm a little bit biased. In my personal opinion, I think it's a tie between him and Terry Funk, but that's my personal opinion. Ric Flair has everything you could want in a pro wrestler. He has the longevity, he has the promo skills, he has the wrestling ability, he has the accolades. He is so well known that there's songs made about him, that sports teams use him for motivation. Rappers have idolized him. There's a lot of rappers that say they pattern their career after Ric Flair promos. A generation of wrestlers on this list like Shawn Michaels, Triple H, patterned himself after Ric Flair. Even Steve Austin at times patterned himself after Ric Flair. Truly one of the most iconic wrestlers there's ever been. Easily one of the best wrestlers of all time, and very much deserving the number one spot on this list. Now, before we do sign off, I do want to talk about a couple things. A couple of what I would consider omission/bias. Again, I don't know what the algorithm used to choose this, but where was your Terry Funks, your Mankind's, your Stings, Dusty Rhodes? It felt like the list was very WWE, WWF centric, and I can understand that. Most wrestling lists are going to be that way because it's the most popular company in the world. But to me, not having a guy like Dusty Rhodes, for instance, in your top 10, or even Sting to be considered for the top 10, it's really something that kind of stood out to me. Overall, I think they did a very good job at putting out what's a comprehensive and really good top 10 list, in my opinion. Just a little bit of a gripe, but that's just my personal opinion. With all that being said, let's smash on that like button, subscribe if you haven't, share the video. If you made it all the way to the end, let me know a wrestler you think that ChatGPT left off the list. Put it down here in the comments. My name is George Coles, and it's been another Heel Heat Top 10.